Imagine standing in a crowded Roman marketplace at sunrise. The air smells like fresh bread and olive oil, and merchants are lifting their stalls' wooden shutters. A young mason argues over a delivery of stones. A widow whispers with a scribe about her husband's will, and a soldier counts coins for a small plot of land he hopes to buy when his service ends. None of them know each other, yet they trust the same invisible promise. The law will protect their words, their property, and their future. That promise did not appear overnight. It was carved, argued, and lived into existence. Long before that bustling morning, Rome was a place of uncertainty. Kings ruled with personal power, and justice depended on who you knew and how loud you could shout. People grew tired of decisions made behind closed doors, tired of laws that felt like secrets. Then came a turning point that would ripple through centuries. The Romans, determined to limit the sway of any single ruler, pushed for laws that everyone could read and understand. They set their rules in writing, not whispered codes, not mysterious traditions. Actual words, visible to all. This is where the 12 tables enter the story like a lighthouse in a foggy sea. Imagine children in ancient classrooms reciting these lines by memory, just as we learn national songs today. The rules were simple enough to remember and firm enough to trust. They told you what happened if your wall fell into your neighbor's garden, how debts should be handled, and who had the right to speak in a dispute. The brilliance was not grand poetry, it was clarity. When justice becomes a shared language, people begin to act with confidence. As Rome expanded beyond its small hills and into a sprawling world, something remarkable happened. The law learned how to travel. A trader from North Africa could make a deal with a merchant from Gaul and know that their promise was not a wish, but a binding reality. Judges and jurists started to ask careful questions. What is fair when two customs collide? Which rule protects both sides with equal weight? Step by step, case by case, a culture of reasoning took shape. Here is a small curiosity that feels surprisingly modern. Roman jurists treated law almost like a science. They studied real problems, wrote opinions, and refined principles through logic and experience. Names like Gaius and Ulpian may sound distant, yet their method feels familiar. Do not rely on force. Rely on reasons that can be explained. From those reasons came ideas that still feel like the backbone of everyday life. Private property meant that what you built or bought belonged to you, not to the whims of a powerful neighbor. Contracts meant that your word, once given and agreed to, had weight in the eyes of the community. Wills meant that love and responsibility could extend beyond a lifetime. Another little-known thread from this tapestry is the role of Roman women in inheritance. The law allowed them to receive property under certain conditions. It was not full equality as we know it today, but it was a meaningful step in an ancient world where many societies kept women outside the room of legal rights. These rules created a sense that families, businesses, and friendships could depend on predictable outcomes, not just on relationships or rank. Over time, Rome's legal wisdom was gathered and edited, rethought and preserved, and it outlived the empire that first gave it shape. Medieval scholars pored over these ideas like explorers reading maps to lost cities. Kings and councils borrowed them, adapted them, and folded them into new codes. When you hear modern lawyers speak about burdens of proof, about good faith in contracts, or about rights that protect individuals against arbitrary power, you can still hear the Romans thinking out loud across the centuries. So imagine that marketplace again. The mason receives the right stones because the contract says so. The widow finds comfort because her husband's wishes have a legitimate path through the courts. The soldier buys his small piece of land, and it becomes a home he cannot lose to a stronger neighbor's desire. These are not dramatic scenes of conquest. They are quiet victories of order and trust, which is exactly where the heart of Roman law beats the strongest. 2,000 years after the first lines were etched into bronze, the spirit of those rules still walks with us. It lives in the idea that no person, not even a ruler, stands above the law. It lives in the belief that clarity is kinder than confusion, and that fair rules, known to all, make ordinary lives sturdier and more dignified. What do you think our world would feel like without those shared promises? Would we still trust strangers with our word, our work, and our hopes? As you reflect on that, join us on this journey through the legacies that quietly shape our days. If you love history as much as we do, like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. There is so much more to explore, and the next story is already waiting. Picture this. It's the 6th century before Christ, and Rome is a city on the edge of chaos. For generations, kings have ruled with absolute power, their word becoming law with the snap of their fingers. Justice isn't about fairness or truth. It's about who you know, how much gold you carry, or whether the king woke up in a good mood that morning. But the Roman people had reached their breaking point. They'd watched too many innocent citizens disappear into dungeons, seen too many noble families stripped of their wealth on a royal whim, endured too many years of tyranny disguised as divine right. The final straw came when King Tarquin the Proud, yes, that was actually his name, committed an act so heinous that it shattered the last threads of loyalty binding the people to their monarchy. In 509 before Christ, something extraordinary happened. The Romans didn't just overthrow their king, they made a sacred vow that would echo through the centuries. Never again would one person hold absolute power over their lives. Never again would justice be the plaything of a single man's desires. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Overthrowing a tyrant is one thing. Building something better is entirely another. The Romans faced a question that would define the next 1,000 years of their civilization. How do you govern a city, then a nation, then an empire, without descending into the very chaos you fought to escape? Their answer would change the world forever. The Roman senators and leaders gathered in heated debate. Some argued for a return to the old tribal customs. Others pushed for rule by the wealthy elite. But the wisest among them understood something profound. If law was to replace the arbitrary will of kings, then law itself must be written down, visible to all, and unchangeable by the whims of those in power. And so began one of history's most ambitious projects, the creation of the 12 Tables. Imagine the scene. Around 450 before Christ, a special commission of 10 men, called the decemviri, was chosen for an almost impossible task. They had to take centuries of unwritten customs, royal decrees, and tribal traditions, then forge them into a coherent legal code that could govern a growing republic. For an entire year, these men worked in secrecy. They studied the laws of other civilizations, particularly the sophisticated legal traditions of ancient Greece. They consulted with priests who had memorized sacred rituals, interviewed merchants who needed clear rules for trade, and listened to common citizens who simply wanted to know what was legal and what wasn't. When they emerged with their work, it wasn't written on fragile papyrus or hidden away in some temple archive. No, the Romans did something revolutionary. They carved their laws into 12 bronze tablets and displayed them in the most public place in Rome, the Forum, where every citizen could see them, read them, and hold their leaders accountable to them. But here's what makes this moment truly special. These weren't just laws for the elite. The 12 Tables covered everything from property disputes between neighbors to the rights of slaves, from marriage contracts to the proper way to declare war. For the first time in Roman history, a farmer could stand before a magistrate and point to the written law, knowing that not even the richest patrician could change what was carved in bronze. Here's a curiosity that will amaze you. The 12 Tables became so fundamental to Roman identity that every school child was required to memorize them completely. Just as children today might recite their national anthem or Pledge of Allegiance, young Romans could recite laws about debt, property rights, and legal procedures by heart. Imagine 8-year-olds discussing the proper procedures for legal testimony during their morning lessons. This wasn't just education, it was cultural DNA being passed down through generations. The impact was immediate and profound. Suddenly, legal proceedings that had once been mysterious rituals controlled by priests and kings became public affairs. Citizens could predict outcomes, prepare defenses, and most importantly, they could trust that the same rules applied to everyone, at least in theory. But the 12 tables were just the beginning. As Rome grew from a small city-state to master of the Mediterranean, their legal system had to evolve. The original tables covered the basics. Don't steal your neighbor's crops, pay your debts, treat witnesses with respect. But what happened when Roman merchants started trading with Greeks, Egyptians, and Gauls? What laws governed contracts between a Roman citizen and a foreign trader? This challenge gave birth to something even more remarkable: the concept of universal legal principles that could apply to anyone, anywhere in the Roman world. Roman jurists began developing what they called the law of nations, legal concepts so fundamental that they transcended local customs and tribal traditions. And here's where the story becomes deeply personal. Think about your own life for a moment. When you sign a lease for an apartment, buy something online, or even get married, you're participating in legal traditions that trace their roots directly back to those bronze tablets in the Roman Forum. The idea that a contract should be honored, that property belongs to its rightful owner, that legal procedures should be fair and transparent, these weren't inevitable human discoveries. They were Roman innovations. The transition from monarchy to republic wasn't just a political revolution, it was a legal one. The Romans had discovered something that would outlast their emperors, survive the fall of their empire, and shape every civilization that followed. The radical idea that law, not power, should be the ultimate authority in human affairs. Another fascinating detail: the Romans were so proud of their legal achievements that they appointed special magistrates called praetors, whose only job was to interpret and apply the law. These weren't warriors or politicians. They were legal specialists, the world's first professional judges, dedicated entirely to understanding justice. As we'll discover, this was just the foundation. The real magic happened when Roman law began to spread beyond the city's walls, carried by legions and traders to the farthest corners of the known world. But that remarkable journey, how local Roman customs became universal principles of justice, is a story that will leave you seeing the modern world with completely new eyes. The revolution that began with the overthrow of Tarquin the Proud didn't end with the establishment of the Republic. In many ways, it was just beginning. The Romans had learned how to create law, but their greatest challenge still lay ahead: how to make that law work for an empire that would span 3 continents and last for over 1,000 years. Picture this. You're a Roman governor in ancient Syria, facing a dispute between a Greek merchant and a Jewish farmer. Back in Rome, senators are debating contracts with Spanish silver miners. Meanwhile, in far-off Britain, Celtic chieftains are learning Roman property laws. How do you make sure justice looks the same, whether you're in the bustling streets of Rome or the windswept frontiers of Germania? This was the challenge that transformed Rome from a city-state into something the world had never seen before: a legal empire that governed not through fear alone, but through the revolutionary power of consistent law. When Rome first began expanding beyond Italy, they faced a problem no civilization had ever solved at such a scale. The Persians ruled through divine kingship. The Greeks had their city-states, each with different customs. But Rome? Rome was trying to create something unprecedented: one law for millions of people across 3 continents. The breakthrough came through an ingenious Roman invention called jurisprudence. Think of it as the world's first legal science. Instead of just having laws written in stone, the Romans created something far more powerful: a system where trained legal experts called jurists could interpret, analyze, and apply laws using pure reason. These weren't politicians or priests making arbitrary decisions. These were legal scholars who treated law like mathematics, finding logical principles that could work anywhere, for anyone. When a new situation arose that no law had covered before, a Roman jurist wouldn't just guess. They would look at similar cases, find the underlying principles, and reason their way to a solution that made sense. Enter 2 names that changed legal history forever: Domitius Ulpianus, known simply as Ulpian, and Gaius. These weren't emperors or generals, but their impact on your life today might be even greater than Caesar's. Ulpian revolutionized legal thinking with a simple but profound idea. Law should serve justice, not just power. He famously wrote that justice meant giving each person their due, and that legal decisions should be based on careful reasoning, not political convenience. His legal opinions were so respected that centuries later, when legal scholars needed to settle disputes, they would still quote Ulpian as the final authority. Gaius did something even more remarkable. He wrote the first comprehensive legal textbook in history, organizing Roman law into clear categories that made sense to students and practitioners alike. His work became so influential that over 1,000 years later, medieval universities across Europe were still using his methods to teach law. But here's what made Roman legal science truly revolutionary. It created precedent. When a Roman jurist made a decision based on careful reasoning, that decision became a guide for future cases. Not a rigid rule that could never change, but a thoughtful reference point that other legal minds could build upon, modify, or even overturn with better reasoning. Imagine you're a merchant in ancient Alexandria, and someone breaks a contract with you. Under the old systems, you might have to bribe a local official or hope the ruler was in a good mood. But under Roman law, you could point to how similar cases had been decided before. You could argue your case based on established principles. You had something that seems obvious to us today but was revolutionary then: predictable justice. This system was so effective that it allowed Rome to do something extraordinary. They could take a Celtic warrior from Britain, a Greek philosopher from Athens, and an Egyptian priest from Memphis and give them all the same legal protections. They could all understand their rights, their obligations, and how disputes would be resolved. The genius wasn't just in the laws themselves, but in how they evolve. Roman legal science created a living system that could adapt to new situations while maintaining its core principles. When Rome encountered new cultures, new technologies, or new forms of commerce, their legal framework could stretch and grow without breaking. Medieval kings weren't fools when they copied Roman legal methods centuries after the empire fell. They recognized something profound. Rome had cracked the code on how to create order without tyranny. They had discovered how to make law serve justice instead of just serving power. This legal revolution reached so deep into human civilization that today, when a judge in Germany considers a contract dispute, when a Brazilian court protects property rights, or when a French lawyer argues about inheritance, they're all using tools and concepts that Roman jurists perfected 2,000 years ago. The Roman legal empire never truly fell. It just transformed, spreading its invisible influence across the modern world, proving that sometimes the most lasting conquests aren't won with swords, but with ideas that make life more just for everyone. Are you fascinated by this ancient legacy? Comment your thoughts below. Like, share, and subscribe to Chanel Legacy of Empires. Here's something that will blow your mind. Right now, as you're watching this video, you're living inside a Roman invention. The phone in your pocket? You own it because Romans invented private property. The lease on your apartment? That's a Roman contract. The inheritance your grandmother left you? Thank a Roman legal concept that's over 2,000 years old. Let me take you back to a time when these ideas didn't exist. When the very notion that you could truly own something, make a binding agreement, or leave your possessions to your children was revolutionary. Imagine you're living in ancient Mesopotamia or early Greece. You think you own your land, but the king can take it any time he wants. You make a deal with someone, but if they're more powerful than you, they can just walk away. You work your whole life to build something, but when you die, whoever's strongest just takes it all. This was reality for most of human history. Then came Rome, and everything changed. The Romans looked at this chaos and asked a simple but profound question. What if people could actually own things? Not just hold them temporarily while someone more powerful allowed it, but truly, legally, permanently own them. This wasn't just about being nice to people. The Romans realized something brilliant. When people know they can keep what they earn, they work harder, they build more, they create wealth. So they invented the concept of absolute private property. For the first time in human history, if you bought a piece of land in Roman territory, it was yours. Not the emperor's, not the local governor's, not your neighbor's if he had a bigger army. Yours. The law said so, and the law was stronger than any individual person. But ownership was just the beginning. The Romans then tackled an even bigger challenge. How do you trust someone you've never met? Picture a merchant in ancient Carthage who wants to buy olive oil from a farmer in Sicily. They're hundreds of miles apart. They speak different languages. They worship different gods. How can they possibly do business together? The answer lay in Rome's second great invention, the binding contract. Roman contracts weren't just handshake deals or vague promises. They were precise legal instruments that spelled out exactly what each person would do, when they would do it, and what would happen if they didn't. More importantly, these contracts were enforceable across the entire Roman world. A deal made in Carthage was just as valid in Rome, in Athens, or in distant Londinium. This created something extraordinary, the world's first truly international economy. A wine merchant in Gaul could sell to a buyer in Egypt, knowing that Roman law would protect both of them. Trade flourished not because people suddenly became more trustworthy, but because they had a legal framework that made trust possible between strangers. Then came perhaps the most personal and powerful Roman legal innovation, the will. Before Rome, when you died, your stuff typically went to whoever could grab it first, usually the strongest male relative. But the Romans said something radical. You should have the right to decide what happens to your life's work after you're gone. Roman wills weren't simple documents. They were sophisticated legal instruments that could set up trusts, free slaves, fund public works, or even adopt heirs. They gave people something precious, the knowledge that their choices and values could outlive their physical existence. But here's where the story gets really interesting. In most ancient cultures, only men could own property or make contracts. Women were essentially legal non-entities, dependent on fathers or husbands for everything. Rome started that way too. But then something remarkable happened. Roman women began inheriting property. Not just small personal items, but major estates, businesses, even entire fortunes. By the time of the empire, wealthy Roman women could own vast properties, invest in shipping ventures, and even lend money to senators. This wasn't just progressive for its time, it was almost unthinkable. Consider a woman named Eumachia from Pompeii. She wasn't from a royal family or married to an emperor. She was a businesswoman who became so wealthy that she funded the construction of an entire public building. Her name was carved in stone for all to see, not as someone's wife or daughter, but as a property owner and civic leader in her own right. This legal revolution created ripple effects that changed everything. When women could inherit and own property, families began thinking differently about their daughters' education. When contracts became reliable, merchants started planning larger ventures. When private property was truly secure, people began investing in long-term improvements to their land and businesses. The Romans had accidentally discovered something that economists today call the foundation of prosperity: secure property rights, enforceable contracts, and predictable legal outcomes. They created a system where your success depended more on your ability to create value than on your skill at violence or your family connections. Think about your daily life for a moment. When you buy coffee with your credit card, you're using a contract system descended from Roman law. When you sign a lease, inherit something from a relative, or even get married, you're participating in legal frameworks that Roman jurists designed. The most amazing part? The Romans built this system not through some grand master plan, but by solving practical problems one case at a time. A dispute between neighbors here, a broken business deal there, an inheritance question somewhere else. Gradually, through thousands of individual decisions, they built the legal foundation that still supports our modern world. These weren't just abstract legal concepts carved in marble. They were tools that transformed how humans could live together, work together, and build something lasting for future generations. Rome gave the world something more valuable than its armies or its monuments. It gave us the framework for civilization itself. So here we are, 2,000 years later, and the ghost of Roman law still walks among us. It's there when you sign your name on a lease, knowing that piece of paper will be honored by courts you've never seen. It's there when you inherit something precious from someone you loved, because Roman jurists decided long ago that your family's wishes should matter more than a stranger's greed. It's there in every constitution that declares no person, not even a president or prime minister, stands above the law. Think about that for a moment. Every time a powerful person faces justice in a courtroom, every time a contract protects someone who can't protect themselves, every time the law chooses reason over force, we're witnessing an echo of decisions made by Roman legal minds in togas, writing by candlelight 2 millennia ago. But here's the question that should keep us all thinking. What would our world actually look like without Rome's legal legacy? Would we have figured out another way to create justice that works across cultures and distances? Would someone else have invented the idea that law should be logical rather than arbitrary? Would we have found another path to the principle that even kings must bow to justice? Maybe we would have. Maybe some other civilization would have given us property rights, binding contracts, and the rule of law. But maybe not. Maybe without Rome's legal foundation, we'd still be living in a world where might makes right, where the powerful take what they want, and where ordinary people have no reliable protection for their life's work. It's humbling to realize how much of what we consider natural and obvious about justice actually required centuries of careful thinking by people whose names most of us will never know. The Roman legal scholars who created these systems weren't trying to change the world forever. They were just trying to solve the problems in front of them, one case at a time, one principle at a time. Yet their solutions became so universal, so fundamentally sound, that they outlasted the empire that created them. Roman legions are gone, Roman emperors are dust, Roman buildings have crumbled, but Roman legal ideas live on in courtrooms from São Paulo to Stockholm, from Tokyo to Toronto. There's something deeply moving about that continuity. Somewhere today, a judge is making a decision based on principles that Ulpian would recognize. Somewhere today, a family is settling an inheritance using rules that Gaius helped design. Somewhere today, two strangers are making a deal they both trust because Roman legal minds figured out how to make promises binding across time and distance. This is how civilizations really conquer the world. Not through the flash of swords, but through ideas so useful that people choose to keep them long after the armies have gone home. Rome's greatest victory wasn't any battle they won. It was convincing the world that justice should be reasonable, predictable, and available to everyone. What lessons can we draw from this ancient tradition? Maybe that the best solutions to human problems aren't always the flashiest ones. Maybe that true progress happens gradually, through careful thinking and patient work, rather than dramatic revolutions. Maybe that the most lasting changes come when we create systems that serve everyone's interests, not just the interests of the powerful. Or maybe the lesson is simpler, that ordinary people, working with good intentions and clear thinking, can create things that outlast empires and reshape the world for centuries to come. What do you think? Looking around at our modern world, what other ancient innovations still shape your daily life in ways you might not even notice? Tell us in the comments below. And if this journey through time has sparked your curiosity about how the ancient world still influences us today, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. We've got so many more incredible tales waiting to be told about how the past created the present we all share.